Conference realignment is all anyone is talking about, but nobody is talking about how it will impact teams already in the SEC and specifically how it might impact our Florida Gators. Our biggest in-state rival is at the very center of the controversy, and we're going to tell you why UF fans should actually want the Seminoles in the SEC. Now listen, I know that's controversial, but I've got some good reasons and I'm down to talk about this and debate it in the comments. So let's keep it civil, but let's chat about it today. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying that I would like nothing more than for Florida State to wallow in mediocrity in the ACC for literally the rest of eternity. They had a chance to pick the SEC back in the day, and they picked the easier route. They've said as much. They picked the ACC over the SEC because it was an easier path to not only the conference championship, but the national title. Their AD has spoken about how there would be a $30 million revenue gap, and I'd love it, absolutely love it, if FSU fell further and further and further behind where they are right now. But here's the truth of the matter. That's just not reality. Brett McMurphy reported yesterday that 7 teams in the ACC, including FSU, Miami, and Clemson, are now working together and exploring options to leave the conference. Based on the Grant of Rights and reporting by Andy Staples of The Athletic, 8 teams are needed to dissolve the conference and break the ACC's Grant of Rights. This magnificent 7, as they're being called, are being labeled extremely close to getting this accomplished. As much as I would love FSU to suffer in poverty for the rest of their lives, it is not realistic. However, here is why UF fans should actually want the Seminoles to join the SEC if the ACC gets dissolved. 1, they could never compete week in and week out in the SEC. They haven't been to their conference championship game in nearly a decade. They've struggled with teams like Wake Forest for years, okay? They've had recent losses to Syracuse, NC State, Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, Pittsburgh, all in conference games the last few years. What in the heck is it going to look like when they have to face teams like Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Tennessee, Kentucky, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and Texas, and others week after week after week? Come on, guys. We should want Florida State to have the hardest schedule possible because it's going to compute to the worst record possible for them. They can't win consistently in the conference they're currently in, and the ACC is so far inferior to the SEC, it's not even funny. Imagine taking what they've done but then picking them up and putting them in the SEC. It's going to be even worse. FSU would be a punching bag and honestly just a mediocre team at best in the SEC. This is a team who hasn't been able to get it done in the ACC. Why in the world would anybody think they'd be able to get it done in the SEC? When the ACC was expanded and realigned, the powers that be specifically put FSU on one side and Miami on the other, thinking that these two teams would meet in the conference championship game every single time. Do you know how often that has happened since Miami joined the conference? 0 times it has happened because neither of these teams have performed well in this ACC since it got expanded. FSU is not the FSU team of old. This is not Jimbo Fisher's team, which honestly was a one-off national championship. This is not the dynasty of Bobby Bowden. FSU is mediocre. They've had one 10-win season, and you would think that they're coming off a national championship run if you checked out what their fans on Twitter are saying. They would be a mediocre team at best in the SEC. And not only that, but they've always had a cakewalk to get to the national title. Not that they're getting there, guys. They're not. They're not even doing well against their mediocre schedule. But in theory, they've had a cakewalk set up for them every single year, and they haven't accomplished much. lately, right? But that cakewalk would be over. If Florida State made it to the national championship game, or heck, even the conference championship game in the SEC, it will be because they fought an incredibly difficult schedule to get there. Nobody is going to be able to say that they had a cakewalk schedule to get to their conference championship game or a cakewalk schedule to get to the conference title. I doubt that they get to either one of those anytime soon if they join the SEC. But if they do, it'll be because they earned it. It won't be because they have a joke ACC schedule. Think about this. They are still going to have to play UF and Miami yearly. There is absolutely zero chance that they are able to ever be nationally relevant again if they join the SEC. They'll keep that annual game with Miami. They'll still have to play Florida because we're in the same conference. But then you throw in teams like we just talked about, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Tennessee, heck, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Arkansas, Kentucky. Vanderbilt is better than half the teams that they have to play in the ACC. Florida State will never be nationally relevant ever again if we let them in the SEC. I'm going to get to the second reason here in just a second, but do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We are going to continue to cover all aspects of Florida Gator football, and we're getting really close to hitting 3,000 subscribers, so help us get there. Make sure you click the subscribe button. All right, my reason number 2. FSU in the Big Ten, which is essentially the other option here, right? If the ACC dissolves, Florida State will either be going to the Big Ten or the SEC. Those are the two conferences that make the most sense for them for a variety of reasons, but geographically is the biggest one. Here's why I think this would be a really bad thing for the Gators. The Big Ten has a better media rights deal and would ultimately make more money. We don't want FSU catching up. But even more importantly than that, we do not want the Seminoles making more money than us from a larger and more attractive TV deal. The next reason is due to our last point about the cakewalk schedule. The Big Ten has some really weak teams in it. They're top heavy with teams like Michigan and Ohio State and USC. But outside of that, FSU's next toughest team would be Penn State, Michigan State, and Wisconsin. Those are not particularly hard teams to play year in and year out. Do they have, one-off good seasons? Absolutely. But I don't think you can compare them to teams like Tennessee, LSU, Florida. It's just not the same. I don't like the idea of FSU having an easier path to a 12-team playoff and making more money than UF every year from a bigger media deal. And that's what happens if they join the Big Ten. Honestly, for FSU, the Big Ten's probably what makes the most sense, right? They continue to have a cakewalk, but they make more money. And listen, there are pros and cons to everything. There are pros and cons to everything. The biggest pro would be for FSU to stay in the ACC as long as humanly possible. But it doesn't seem like that is going to happen. It's not going to be as long as we would like it to. It doesn't seem like the ACC is really going to be around that much longer. So let's get them in the SEC where they're likely to be a bottom tier team and at best a mediocre team that is never able to actually accomplish anything of major significance ever again. What are your thoughts? Listen, I know that this is controversial. I know we don't really want FSU in the SEC because they don't deserve it. But if we're being honest, FSU in the SEC would mean the absolute end of them ever being nationally relevant again, and I am good with that. We've got a couple more videos coming up this week after taking some time off on vacation last week, so lock in with the channel and keep your eyes peeled. If you didn't see our video on ESPN buying in on the Gators in 2023, do me a favor and click right here.